Guys,
my
I'd like
God.
to welcome Kevin, or Kevin would like to welcome me. Yeah,
Kevin sounds like he's further away from you when he's next to you than when he's than when you guys are in different countries.
it's true. Just let me just put pause a sec, guys. Um, so guys, firstly, it was a good opportunity to spend Shabbos with Kevin. I thought it was quite special. In South Africa, I was packing. I just didn't have a chance to see him, other than the 20 minutes that I bumped into him, Gavin, obviously at the restaurant, but I was just packing non-stop. So just a very special privilege to spend time with Kevin, just him and I, and to see a different part of Israel. And Kevin's got an amazing sense of direction. All have superpowers. Direction is Kevin. He left me 2 roads down and took me like wherever to find it he needed. I've got no sense of direction. So one can be functional in one area and another area terrible. So Kevin is actually amazing. He's like a homing pigeon. Also, we had a chance to learn last night, just him and I. And we didn't really use the Gemara as such. We just had a conversation about the daf and every part of it. Kev, did you enjoy it? Okay, so it was nice to learn in person. I've done it with Arthur. Arthur and I spent a few hours last time learning Bava Basra. Kevin and I spent a little bit of time learning Bava Kamma the stuff and concept. Kevin asked some questions. And please God, Gavin and I would do it in person, which would be nice as opposed to a share.
Is this an optional thing or is it compulsory?
It's not compulsory. Nothing's compulsory.
I'm teasing you. Of course, I'd love to do.
Okay, so guys, I'll tell you where we were. I'm going to try and whisper. Kevin's right. We have to be sensitive to the neighbors. So if we still, we're talking about the difference of opinions between Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Shimon, and just going to fly through it. If one stole a pregnant cow and it gave birth, that's what we learned in the Mishnah, etc. Or a wool laden ewe and he shared it, he pays the value of a cow ready to give birth or the value of an ewe ready to be shorn. So I'm not going to go through the Rashi and the Rosh again. We've discussed it. I'm going to focus on Rabbi Yehuda, just so that you know that Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Meir, I still don't know how to pronounce it after all these years, honestly, says that you have to return that which you stole and all the benefits. Any appreciation is not kept at all. As far as Rabbi Yehuda is concerned, the stolen animal is returned to the original owner as is. What did we mean as is? That in the shorn and non-pregnant state, obviously the robber pays the owner the difference between the value of the wool or fetus at the time of the robbery, and he doesn't return the stolen article itself, as we know. So, okay, and in Rabbi Shimon said we look at as an appraisal with him according to its cash value at the time of the robbery. Now, we need to clarify Rabbi Meir's opinion. Do any of you remember where we finished off? By the way, Arthur, as I've got your cat's ass in the line of fire.
I was going to ask the leg, actually. I was just sitting in front of the phone for a second. But I'll just go back on mute.
Okay. So, do any of us remember where we left off? I remember. I'm just testing you guys. What was the issue with Rabbi Meir? Can anybody answer me? What are we trying to determine with Rabbi Meir last time?
Whether there's change of ownership or not with him, because it's always unclear whether with Rabbi Meir or Rabbi Meir, I don't know how to say it either. It's always unclear with him whether he's implementing a penalty, which we think is the case, or whether I haven't read this enough. I did a little bit of prep this afternoon, so I've got some idea, but I didn't do it enough. You got to go through this meticulously. But so what I picked up basically is that Rabbi Meir. Okay, so firstly you got Rashi. The difference between Rabbi Meir and Rashi is that with Rabbi Meir ownership he said you can't benefit at all. So everything has to go back, everything,
Correct.
including the shearing, any improvements. So and we're not. I'm not 100% sure from what I read, and I think it's also unclear whether it's a penalty. Whether I think it seems like he's implementing a penalty, and that he does take ownership as taking place, but he implements a penalty in order to avoid that from happening going forward. Then you got, and then also he goes on about the slave, and he talks about a slave being equal to land and property, and those things are in effect not. He doesn't consider them. Obviously, property is not movable, but he doesn't consider a slave movable either, and he says that it has to be brought back as is. Okay, and the reason why with Rabbi Meir, why it seems to be a penalty is because he says the problem comes in with depreciation of the animal. There's no problem if there's no depreciation. If there's appreciation in the animal, then the original owner scores big time. But if there is change in ownership, if there is depreciation, then the original owner will lose out. And yeah, this is where the thief has to, the robber was not a thief here, it's a robber. The robber has to bring him to pay the difference between the value of the animal that he brings in under malnourished whatever in order to feed him up. So that's what I got out of Rabbi Meir. And then Rashi, what I got out of Rashi, you can correct me afterwards, but I think I'm more or less in line. Then Rashi says that ownership doesn't take place in the animal because giving birth and to a ewe and shearing is not a change in ownership, but the actual ewe, the ewe itself is change of ownership, and the shearings themselves are change of ownership. Those themselves are change of ownership. So the original animal goes back, according to Rashi, and you pay just the value at the time of birth of the birth, or the value of the shearings at the times of shearing. But there was one part which I need clarification on. I'm still not sure how Rabbi Yehuda is different to Rashi, because they seem very much the same thing. Because Rabbi Yehuda says also, just hear me out.
I'm not interrupting. I'm listening to every word. And firstly, I'm impressed.
I'm sure I'm making mistakes.
I'm impressed. I'm really impressed at the amount of work you've done, because from Thursday, leagues ahead. I'm listening. I'm not interrupting at all.
I did 40 minutes. It helps. But I still don't, so I don't really understand. I didn't read it enough, but can't really see why Rabbi Yehuda is different from Rashi. He seems virtually to be the same, because he's saying as well that he says that you can't benefit. Everything must go back. He says the animal must go back, and he says he seems to be saying exactly the same thing as Rashi, and they both have that example of that. Of like if it's valued at 100 and then it's 130 shekels when they actually when the animal. So this is the part I don't understand. Like, I don't understand the difference between Rashi and Rabbi Yehuda properly. And what I don't understand is I'm not sure. It says in the Mishnah that the value of the ewe and what's it called, the shearings has to be at the time of theft. But then it also talks about the value at the time of birth and the time of the actual shearing itself, which could be a year later. No, you can't be a year later.
Okay, there you asked 4 different questions. Let's just address each one.
Okay, so but it can't be a year later because obviously you would have given birth. But let's say it's 3 months later, 6 months later, and so that's the part that I'm not sure, because I know it does say in the Mishnah that it should be at the time of robbery, but then they also seem to appraise it at the time of birth and at the time of shearings as well. So that would be a different price. So that's the part I'm.
So let's
that's
go
what I
through
picked up.
each of your questions. I'm very impressed. I can tell you that you've got a natural ability with this, and when you put in the effort, it shows. It actually shows.
But I can even tell you what the other guy said. Rosh is Rosh, yeah. So I think it's Rosh, eh?
Yeah.
So what was the difference with Rosh? So Rosh's thing was that that ownership does take place, basically. That was Rosh. Ownership takes place in the animal itself, just by giving birth. So you compensate everything. You don't give the animal back.
Okay. So
and you compensate also, I think, at the you compensate for everything, I think, or just for the value at the time of theft, of robbery.
Okay.
So I'm a little bit not 100% clear on everything, but
I'll clear up all those issues. Very well done. So,
thanks.
first thing is, if you've got the Bava Kamma, the third book, you only have the second as far as I remember, but if you look on 93b, note 2, it discusses the difference between Rashi and Rosh. Okay. My memory is not bad. It's in note 2.
I went through that note. I actually found that note. That's how I knew it was going on.
So,
I did go through the note.
Correct, I know. I sent it to you. So, what you've got to clarify is you asked a very good question. You don't see how Rashi is different to Rabbi Yehuda. So the answer is he's not. He's explaining Rabbi Yehuda.
Is that what he's doing? Okay.
So let's just go through each one, and I'm very impressed with the work you've done. Very impressed. So let me put it to you like this: let's just define the different opinions before we go to Rabbi Meir's issues, and he has many. Rabbi Meir says that anything that you steal and all the byproducts that occur from it have to be returned to the original owner. Clear as day. What's going to happen is, are we going to discuss that? Is that a penalty he imposes? Or is it in fact that he holds that a change remains in its place, meaning physical change doesn't affect acquisition for the robber? That's what we're going to learn. Why? And as you quite rightly said, it has an impact in terms of deterioration of the animal, in terms of who ends up suffering. But we'll address that issue just now. The second thing is Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says as follows. He said, look, the stolen animal is returned to the original owner as is. And what does he mean? That the stolen animal is returned to the original owner in its present shorn and non-pregnant state. Additionally, what happens is the robber pays the owner the value of the wool or fetus at the time of the robbery, because all of the opinions agree, whether it's Rashi or Rosh, that whenever a robber does not return the stolen article itself, he must pay whatever its full value was at the time of the robbery. So what's happening? But the robber still makes a profit here because he does not, however, pay the value of the subsequent appreciation that occurred while the animal was in possession. So in other words, Rabbi Yehuda does not penalize the robber, like it appears that Rabbi Meir may do. We're still going to see if he does. So what you were learning of why you were confused as to how the Rashi differs from Rabbi Yehuda and the Rosh is the answer is it doesn't. They're both explaining Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rashi also explains Rabbi Meir and he explains Rabbi Shimon. It's just the note in 93b deals with his issue of explaining Rabbi Yehuda. So let me tell you how they both explain Rabbi Yehuda. As far as Rashi is concerned, Rashi looks at things literally and he says, look, at the end of the day, the animal has not had a significant enough physical change where the robber gets to keep the animal and give the cash equivalent. Because if you have a look, it's like an animal carrying a load. Whether the load is heavy or whether the load is light or non-existent, the animal is just the animal. It's like a person carrying a backpack. So the only thing that's changed there is the fetus. The fetus became a calf, but the cow is what it is. Now, as far as Rashi is concerned, it's the same thing with the ewe and the shearings. It's like you've got a guy, and I said to Kevin last night, you've got a guy who's a skinhead. So you associate a skinhead maybe with a certain ideology, and he's got long hair, associate him with a bee and hippie. Okay? But at the end of the day, if you look at if you look at the physical properties of that person, the only thing that grew is their hair. That's all. They didn't become stronger or weak or anything else. Their hair is external. How do we know? If I bite somebody's hair, do they writhe in agony? Yes or no? No. So it's external to them. So therefore, for sure, if the hair or wool of the ewe or the animal grew, the only thing that changed was the hair, the length of hair, the quality of the hair, etc. But the ewe is the ewe. So therefore, that affects the behavior, according to Rashi, of how the robber repays the original owner. So what happens is that we need to facilitate a teshuvah for the robber if he wants to make a teshuvah. Now, many times the robber might not have the additional cash lying around. He's a robber. He's got the article, but not the cash. So Rashi is saying, Rav Yehuda is saying, well, give back the animal and make restitution on the part that's changed, because the animal has not changed. Now, if you have a look at animal, generally has 3 trimesters. You've got your first trimester, even in humans, your second trimester, and your third. So say a non-pregnant cow is worth 100 zuz. And in the first trimester, the fetus, the cow's worth an extra 10, so it's 110 zuz. Second trimester, 120 zuz. Third trimester, 130 zuz. Now, when that fetus actually makes a successful calf, and the fetus isn't dying in childbirth nor is the mother, it's now gone from 30 to 50 because a calf is worth half a full cow. Get it? So what happens in this case is, say, for example, the cow's in the third trimester, it's worth 130 zuz. If it's non-pregnant, it's worth 100. Now, if the cows give birth, it's not worth 130 zuz. It's non-pregnant. So it's 100. So the robber gives the original owner back the cow, and he makes restitution with the timeline of the robbery in its third trimester of an extra 30 zuz in cash. Now, Rav Yehuda still holds that the appreciation benefit from a fetus to a calf means that the robber has acquired an extra 20 zuz in profit. The robber keeps that. That's according to Rashi's explanation of Rav Yehuda. Make sense? Okay. The Rosh says, no, it is a significant change. What happens is when the cow becomes pregnant, it's not even the same animal at all anymore. The animal is physically changed. It's not carrying a load. It's actually intrinsically changed. The same thing with a sheep is that when it's grown a coat of wool, it's actually changed the animal in terms of intrinsic value itself. And therefore, what happens is that amount of dramatic physical change renders an acquisition for the robber of the actual article itself. And then what happens is the robber has to make restitution at the time of the robbery, but he still keeps the appreciation profit. And how do we know that? It was that pasuk that said, if a thief or robber, I don't remember offhand, steals that which he stole. So there's a redundant word that he stole. If you steal, you don't have to say if he stole afterwards. But redundancy means this whole issue of physical change affecting acquisition for the robber means 2 things. Firstly, the robber never gets off the hook and he gets to keep the animal that he stole just because it makes a physical change. That's for sure. All opinions agree that the timeline of the robbery, the original owner gets recompensated in full. That's number 1. Number 2, what it means is if the physical properties have changed, then it no longer resembles the article that was stolen, and therefore that original article doesn't have to be returned. And there was 2 reasons for that, and I'm going to explain the Rosh now. The first was biblical. Well, how do we know it's biblical? Because we rely on the pasuk. So it had the redundancy of the word steals and if he stole, sort of thing, which means it's saying it has to be in existence, number 1, or number 2, in the very state that it looked like when it was done. Then you've got the rabbinical side, which is an enactment to allow for teshuvah of the thief. So, guy goes to Macro or Marker Hardware, let's say he goes to Bull Warehouse, okay, and he steals some planks. And now he builds a whole dining room table and he steals some, what do you call it, blueprints or whatever. He goes to Builder's Warehouse and he gets one of the workers to give him a whole lot of stuff and he pays for work and he steals it. I say he doesn't, he just steals it, whatever. Then what happens is once he's spent a whole weekend making furniture, he's not going to want to make it to teshuvah at that point and throw away his whole time that he took in manufacturing the good. So that's going to impede his teshuvah. What the rabbi said on the rabbinical front, not on the scriptural source, of the redundancy of the word any star, which shows it's not redundant. Say it doesn't return back an article if it's changed physically, but merely gives the cash representation. But what we are saying is, if he's put in a tremendous amount of effort and it doesn't resemble what it did originally, the guy's not going to make it to sugar if he has to undo all his hard work. So all he has to do is pay Builder's Warehouse for the materials he stole, raw material, and that will aid his to sugar. But it's cash because he's not going to dismantle what he did. Do you get what I'm saying? He's not going to dismantle it. So that's the rabbinical enactment to aid to sugar, as well as the biblical precept of how do we use that word, which no Torah word is wasted, where it's repeating the concept of stealing, was to show that if the article no longer resembles the same physical form, the robber can give the cash equivalent to the owner. Is that understood so far before I explain the Rosh?
Yeah.
Okay, so the Rosh has a different explanation. He was saying, look, the physical change isn't just to the byproduct, like the fetus to the calf, or the medium hair growth to the longer hair growth or wool growth. He was saying the animal changes. A non-pregnant animal is not the same as a pregnant animal, and a shorn ewe is not the same as a hair-laden ewe. So what happens is the robber keeps the animal in this case and gives the equivalent at the time of the robbery. Now, nothing's changed according to his opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda is saying that there was an appreciation in terms of the length of the wool between the time of the robbery and the time of the trial. See, Gavin, there's a timeline of the time of the trial, the time of the robbery, okay? So it's measured at the time of the robbery. So that appreciation is not taken into account and the robber can keep it. Okay, the only reason he can keep it is because it physically doesn't resemble the original state, and the original owner can't say anything because he has been recompensated in full at the timeline of the robbery. The fact that during the period of when it came to trial, it was under the robber's care and it appreciated in value, okay, the robber benefits. But the original owner isn't unfairly treated. He got back exactly what it was worth at the time of the robbery. The only difference is that the Rosh says the animal changes physically. Therefore, he gets to keep both animals and gives the cash equivalent at the time of the robbery, which would be 130 zuz, because he's now keeping the cow with 100 zuz and the calf at 50 zuz. But he only owes 130 zuz for the third trimester state of the cow at the time of pregnancy, at the time of the robbery, even though the trial took place ages afterwards. The same thing with the ewe. Whatever the ewe was worth at the time, say the ewe is now worth 150 zuz because it had a huge coat of wool, but at the time of the robbery it was worth only 120 zuz. He keeps the ewe and the full laden wool and he gives 120 zuz in cash. So Rabbi Yehuda is explained by Rosh and Rashi in the same way. The only difference is that the physical change is deemed its byproduct by Rashi, whereas the Rosh says it's the animal itself that had the physical change, and therefore you can't use the return of the animal as part of the deposit and pay the difference. That's the only thing that Rosh is saying. Interruption. That's the only thing.
Yeah. And then I want to ask you, just there seemed to be a discussion that I picked up. I don't know. I saw something about. I'm not sure if you answered it. And I don't know if I saw something that wasn't there. But I was under the impression that because it keeps talking about the fact that you value the fetus and the ewe or whatever and the shearings at the time of birth, at the time of robbery, right? But later on, there is mention of it where it talks about the appraising or the valuation taking place at the time of actual birth, not at the time of the robbery.
Okay,
did you see that somewhere?
I did, and I'm gonna. No, you didn't miss it. You did see it. So this is when it's talking about Rabbi Shimon. He said, "Look, it's like iron sheep assets that assessed at the time of the robbery." I'm going to explain your question now, just so you understand. That was brought in context with Rabbi Shimon, and said whether there's appreciation or depreciation. The example of a price of property in 4 ways, or Midrand or Brownston, that appreciated when it was farmland, and you put the basic beyond horses, etc. at that point in time. Or the case of Yeovil, where it was prime Jewish property, Orange Grove, and now it's become like a township. So, which is depreciation. But either way, when they came in the marriage, it was appraised at that value. And when the husband divorces the wife or predeceases her, the state pays her that value at the time of the marriage. But what it's talking about here is Rabbi Shimon. Now, when they get divorced, Gavin, they could get divorced 10 years later, could predecease her about 15 years later. So the assessment is done at the time of the trial or the time of legalities. But the timeline of which it's assessed is at the time of when they got married. The same thing with the robbery. And I used this example last night with Kevin, because Kevin asked me some good questions. But what happened is I said to him, look, I'm sensitive about this Forex issue because I'm in Israel. So say I've got $1,000, right? And somebody stole that money from me on March the 24th. Okay? Now the trial only came on the 29th of December. If you look at what R1,000,000 was worth, it lost 168,000 Rand in value from the 24th of March to the 29th of December. Okay. Now, you're talking about a case, Gav, where the thief took, for example, he took $1,000 and he went to Israel and he spent it. Okay, say he went to Israel. Gav, you're falling asleep. Your eyes are closing slowly. You okay? Gavin.
Me? No, I'm wide awake.
Okay, so what I'm saying is from the 24th of March this year to the 29th of December, on R1,000,000, there was 168,000 Rand lost in the Rand value. So I'm going to tell you about Rabbi Shimon and what it's talking about the time of the trial versus the time of the robbery. Okay, say somebody, there's Shimon and Reuven, and Reuven stole $10,000 from Shimon from South Africa. And he went to Israel and he blew the money on one woman and song, or whatever. Maybe he's a kosher yid and he's just a thieving yid, but he's sneered. So maybe just wine and song. Let's leave the woman out of it. It comes back and there's a trial in December on the 29th of December. Now, what happens is they assess that value is where there was depreciation of the Rand, but there was appreciation of the dollar. So what would have happened is that there would have been a fortune of money the South African guy would have made on his $10,000. Do you get what I'm saying? $10,000. He would have made a fortune of money in that timeline. I'm giving you a real case. But what happens is the original owner is only recompensated at the time of the robbery, even though the trial has taken place afterwards. So what you read was the case of Rabbi Shimon, where there was appreciation, depreciation after the period of the trial. But that's compared with the timeline of the robbery. And it's the timeline of the robbery at which there's payment done. But it has to be compared against the timeline of the trial in order to determine if there's appreciation and depreciation.
So what do they do if there's so let's say there's appreciation? Sorry, I don't know if I heard that clearly. What do they do?
So it depends if it's Rabbi Shimon's opinion or Rabbi Meir, or Rabbi Yehuda. There would be three different takes on it, but the point of it is you read correctly. They have to, at the time of the trial, see what's transpired. Because if you're holding that appreciation or depreciation makes a difference, and the effect is different with Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Shimon, the time of the trial does become relevant. It does become relevant, as we're going to see, because there's the robbery timeline and there's the timeline of the trial. But that's the only way that you can mark clearly if there's been an appreciation or depreciation. Does that make sense?
If they always pay according to the date of the robbery, then why is the date of the trial even relevant? I understand they reassess it, but for what then? If they're not going to...
All right, I'll tell you, it's a good point. They assess it to teach firstly, even according to the opinion that says, what's the difference since they give it at the time of the robbery? Why do we learn this? Because the only reason we know about the fact that it's done at the timeline of the robbery is if you have a comparison. How does a person know they're rich or poor compared to other people? There's two ways you can compare to oneself and a previous history or compare to others. Either way, you need a timeline history to know if you're doing better or worse than you should be. Do you get what I'm saying? It's a metric. So all it's doing is it's giving a metric that the time of the trial is different from the time of the robbery. And we know how to deal with the principle of appreciation or depreciation. The metric is teaching us the principle, the time metric. Does that make sense of what's transpired? That's what it's for. We wouldn't know the principle without some sort of comparative norm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of, but I think it will clear up a little bit more later.
No, it will clear it. It will clear it up. I can't give away the game before it's happened because it'll kill the surprise.
I thought it comes up, but it starts talking because I didn't actually go from your notes. I couldn't get my printer to work, so I actually went to the shul and I took Bava Kamma direct. And that's why I said I found that note because it referred to that note, and thank God I found that note. I realized you sent it to me, and I looked slightly ahead. Because people were talking all around me, it was so difficult to concentrate. The last 10 minutes.
It's crazy.
Let me go slightly ahead because I've already recapped kind of what you kind of went through, and I jumped ahead and I saw it starts talking about the what's it called when you marry somebody, the ketubah and all that, and that covers a lot of this type of stuff, the appraisal, the timing, and all of that. So it will come clearer to me as we progress.
Okay, but that's different. When you were talking about the appraisal and the timing, that's talking about improvements. In other words, is there a lien on the ketubah? Is there not a lien? Is there a guarantee on the ketubah? Is there not a guarantee on the ketubah? What if somebody defaults on a loan? Are you entitled to take the improvements of the timeline between the trial and when the robbery actually took place? But all of this, in principle, Gavin, is a metric. And that metric is saying if there's a winner and a loser, the bottom line principle is who gains? The original owner and the thief. And Kevin quite rightly said last night, well, why should the thief gain it all? And the reality is the thief in principle doesn't really totally gain in one sense, in that spiritually he's held fully accountable. You must know that. Number two, there's a fact that the original owner never loses. That's your overlying principle, is that the original owner never loses. Ever. What he does lose is a perceived value, meaning he might have lost the appreciation, but he certainly didn't lose out in the actual amount. But I think Kevin's question more specifically, even though he didn't articulate it this way, is why should the robber be ever given any benefit of a crime? And he holds with Rabbi Meir, Kevin. And I think it's a very strong opinion. But by the same token, what you've got to realize is how badly do you penalize somebody? Whether it's a car accident or whether it's damages or whatever, we generally penalize a robber worse because it's not negligence, it's a planned crime, especially in the case of a robbery where a weapon's involved, and it's a difficulty. But as far as Rabbi Yehuda is concerned, you still have to have integrity with regards to the pasuk. If he stole, the redundancy of the word, if he stole, if you already talked about theft, that it has to be exactly in the state at which it was stolen. But what happens if the article doesn't exist anymore? Then what timeline do you work on? That's one of the principles. The second one is the principle of teshuvah. How difficult do we make the teshuvah if there was a lot of effort after the theft and the article doesn't resemble what it did? And then there's another issue that's going to come up, is that the robber could have actually made sure the animal was deteriorated and never fed and half starved to death. The fact that he fed the animal to his own cost and kept it in a reasonable state is a bit like a guardian. Okay, it's a guardian against your will, but he could have returned the animal in a state that was so emaciated. It could have been cruel to the animal and bad for your pocket. The fact that he looked after the animal means to a certain extent he can gain some of the profit of the appreciation because he did do a decent job of looking after the animal. So there is another perspective to see it.
But he had ulterior motives. It wasn't for the benefit of the owner, unfortunately. It was his own personal benefit.
Correct. But if it made sure that you could return it as is, In other words, if you hold that physical change does not affect acquisition, the original owner loses if he treats the animal badly. He really does. And one of the considerations in the daf coming up about why you'd compensate the robber a little bit by feeding the animal there's profit is if you rely on the rule that physical change doesn't affect acquisition, the original owner could really have one dead animal, suffering animal in his hands, lose money, and the animal can be cruelly treated. So it's trying to look at a way to encourage all parties to come to some sort of you know what a compromise is, when everybody's unhappy. When you meet everybody at the halfway mark and happy.
It's called marriage.
It's called marriage, yeah.
Yes.
So that was the beauty of. So the thing of it is, Gavin, there's a lot of issues at play. But one of the issues we discussed was the metric of timeline. The other one is clarity on Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The third one is why Kevin holds like Rabbi Meir. And the fourth one is why Rabbi Shimon talks about actual appraisal without depreciation or appreciation taken into effect, which is also a principle. And we're going to find out the logic with that. So the beauty is when we learn all these opinions, we're going to see the merit in each of them and to try and stretch ourselves a bit. Then we'll make a decision. I
quickly saw a thing there. It also starts talking Rabbi Meir about whether it was intentional or unintentional. So that we'll get onto that tomorrow.
We'll get onto that about sometimes it can be robbery by mistakes made where it costs money. That's unintentional compared to a proper. Costs money, but it's through not paying attention to detail. So that's seen in a slightly different light. I'm going to give you a bit of a heads up. Guys, I hope today's show was good. Kevin and Gavin and Arthur, thank you very, very much. Gavin, thank you for putting the work. I hope I answered your questions to your satisfaction. If I didn't, you must just tell me what I didn't.
No. Well, I can't tell you what you didn't, but I can tell you that you did a good job on what you did do. Okay. I don't know if you left anything out. I can't tell you. But you addressed everything that I was. Thank you.
Pleasure. Well done on the effort. Lovely to see you. And it's an honor to be with Kevin. And to learn with him in person. It was just really enjoyable. And guess what? I bought him also during the live share. Don't worry. He was nodding off. I'm boring no matter when. At least I'm consistent.
But you could have handed him his turbo bite if you were
Kevin's on mute.
No, but Dan's it's not fair. I mean,
Kevin's on mute.
I know you can hear me. Okay.
Yeah.
You can't talk. I couldn't sleep on Friday. I needed you here.
I know all of you. I make you fall asleep with boredom. What can I do, guys?
I must admit, when you're here, you and I spent early hours in the morning. Never mind going to bed early.
Yeah, I remember.
Like 2, 3 in the morning. Okay, time to go to bed now.
Yeah, no, I remember.
Because we actually have a good time when we discuss things.
We do. Kevin's here in person.
There's a picture there, and he's in your room there.
Yeah, he's frozen.
He's frozen himself.
Frozen himself. That's so funny.
The powers I didn't know.
This is brilliant. I don't know.
This is brilliant, Kevin. Look at this.
And he's frozen
there too. Frozen there too.
Yeah, he's frozen there too. And you still moving. This is